You've been told your whole life that gold is the ultimate safe haven, that when everything else falls apart, gold holds its value. That it's the one thing you can trust when governments fail and currencies collapse. But there's a group of people in America who reject this idea completely. They don't buy gold. They don't hoard it, okay? They don't even think about it. And they've survived every economic crisis of the last century better than almost anyone else. They're the Amish. And if you understood why they never buy gold, you'd probably never buy it either. Here's what nobody tells you about gold. It doesn't actually do anything. You can't eat it, can't build with it. You can't plant it in the ground and grow more food. It just sits there, inert, waiting for someone else to decide it's valuable. The Amish understood something that Wall Street spent billions trying to make you forget. Value isn't what glitters. Value is what keeps you alive when the system stops working. Think about the last time the economy truly collapsed. Not a recession, not a market correction, a real collapse. When it happened, what saved people? Was it the gold bars hidden in their basement? Or was it the neighbor who knew how to fix a water pump? The community that shared food. It's the skills that couldn't be taken away by a government decree or a bank failure. The Amish bet everything on the second option. And they've never lost that bet. But this isn't a story about the Amish. Not really. This is a story about what happens when an entire society becomes convinced that survival means accumulating things that do actually sustain life. It's about how we've been taught to confuse wealth with security. And it's about why that confusion makes you incredibly vulnerable to the very crises you're trying to protect yourself from. Let's go back for a moment. Not to some distant historical era, but to something more recent. Something you probably remember. 2008, the financial system was collapsing. Banks were failing. Lehman Brothers disappeared overnight. People's retirement accounts evaporated. And what did the experts tell everyone to do? Buy gold. Gold prices soared. Everyone was panicked, buying gold coins, gold bars, gold ETFs. It felt smart. It felt like the only rational move in an irrational world. Now, ask yourself this. What did that gold actually do for the average person who bought it? Did it put food on their table when they lost their job? Did it pay their mortgage when the bank came calling? Did it keep the lights on? No. It sat there, a shiny insurance policy that couldn't actually insure anything that mattered in daily life. Sure, you could sell it, but sell it for what? For the same currency you didn't trust in the first place. For dollars that you were convinced were about to become worthless. Here's the trap. Gold only has value if the system you were trying to protect yourself from continues to function well enough that someone else wants to buy your gold. Think about that for a second. You're buying gold because you don't trust the system. But gold only helps you if the system holds together enough for you to sell it back into that system. It's a paradox, and it's a paradox that makes someone else very, very rich. The Amish never fell for this. They looked at gold and asked a simple question. If everything falls apart tomorrow, what do I actually need? The answer wasn't a metal. It was land, skills, community, tools, seeds, relationships, things that produce value rather than just store it. They built their lives around assets that work for them, not assets that require someone else to assign them value. Now, you might be thinking, that's fine for the Amish, but they live in a completely different world. They don't participate in the modern economy. They don't need what we need. But that's not quite true. The Amish do participate in the economy. They buy and sell. They run businesses. Many of them are incredibly successful. They just refuse to let the economy own them. They refuse to believe that their security depends on things they can't control. And that's where this gets uncomfortable, because what they're really refusing is the story you've been sold. The story that says wealth equals security. That if you just accumulate enough of the right assets, you'll be protected from whatever comes next. It's a comforting story. It makes you feel like you're in control, but it's also a lie. Let me show you why. Every time there's a crisis, the same pattern repeats. People panic. They rush to buy whatever they've been told is safe. Gold, treasury bonds, real estate, Bitcoin, whatever the safe haven of the moment happens to be. Prices spike. Early buyers make money, but the average person is a person who buys in during the panic. They're not buying safety. They're buying someone else's exit strategy. This happened with gold in the 1980s. It happened again in 2011. It's happening right now with cryptocurrency. The pattern is always the same. Fear drives demand. Demand drives price. Price creates the illusion of value. And then, when the fear subsides, the price collapses. The people who bought at the top are left holding an asset that's worth a fraction of what they paid. But the people who sold it to them, they're fine. They got out before the crash. The Amish avoid this trap entirely, not because they're smarter than everyone else, not because they have some secret knowledge, but because they've organized their entire lives around a different principle. They don't ask, what will be valuable in the future? They ask, what will keep us alive and thriving no matter what happens? Those are two very different questions, and they lead to very different answers. So what do the Amish actually invest in? Land, first and foremost. Not as a speculative asset, but as a productive one. Land that grows food, land that provides timber, land that can support a family for generations. They invest in tools that last, in skills that can't be taken away, in relationships that create mutual obligation and support. They invest in systems of mutual aid that function outside the formal economy. When someone's barn burns down, the community rebuilds it. No insurance company, no bank loan, just people helping people because they know they might need the same help someday. This isn't nostalgia. This isn't romanticism. This is a cold, rational calculation about what actually provides security in an uncertain world. And the math is brutal, because it suggests that almost everything you've even taught about building wealth is designed to benefit someone else more than it benefits you. Think about your own portfolio for a second. How much of it is invested in things that require a functioning financial system to have any value? Stocks need markets. Bonds need governments. Even real estate needs property rights enforced by courts and police. Gold needs someone willing to trade something useful for it. What happens if those systems stop functioning? Not forever, just for a little while. Long enough that you need to eat, to stay warm, to keep your family safe. What in your portfolio actually helps you then? The Amish answer is stark. Almost nothing that most people own would help in that scenario. And so they own different things. They own the means of production instead of financial claims on someone else's production. They own relationships instead of contracts. They own knowledge instead of credentials. And here's what's striking. Even when the system is functioning normally, this approach seems to work better than what everyone else is doing. Amish businesses have a success rate that's far higher than the national average. Amish communities have virtually no homelessness, no hunger, no unpayable debt. They're not rich by conventional standards, but they're secure in a way that most Americans, even wealthy Americans, are not. They sleep well at night. It's not because they have gold in a safe, but because they have a place in a community that won't let them fall. Now here's where the story turns. It's the same forces that make gold valuable during the crisis are the forces that create the crisis in the first place. Let me explain. Kid, gold becomes valuable when people lose faith in currency. When does that happen? Kids, when governments print too much money. Kid, when they take on too much debt. When they make promises they can't keep. And why do they do those things? Because the economy demands constant growth, constant expansion, constant returns to investors. But here's the problem. Real economies don't grow forever. Real resources are finite. Real communities have limits. At some point, growth requires borrowing from the future. It requires making promises that can't be kept. It requires inflating the currency to pay off debts that are too large to pay off any other way. And that's when gold bugs start celebrating. That's when they tell you to buy. But they're not helping you prepare for the crisis. They're profiting from it. The Amish saw through this centuries ago. They built their economy on a completely different foundation. Not growth, but sustainability. Not expansion, but resilience. Not individual wealth, but community prosperity. And the result is a system that doesn't need gold, because it doesn't create the conditions that make gold necessary. You're starting to see the real picture now. Gold isn't a solution to economic instability. It's a symptom of it. It's what people buy when they VA lost faith in everything else, but have yet figured out what actually provides security. It's an intermediate step between trust and self-sufficiency, and the Amish skip that step entirely. But let's push this further, because there's something even more troubling here. The gold market, like most financial markets, is dominated by people who don't actually want the thing they're buying. They want the profit from selling it to someone else. This creates a strange dynamic. The value of gold depends not on its usefulness, but on the next person's fear. You're not buying security. You're rebuying the hope that someone else will be more scared than you are and will pay you more than you paid. This is what the Amish refuse to participate in. They refuse to build their security on someone else's fear. They refuse to profit from crisis. Okay? And they refuse to accept that their well-being should depend on market sentiment or investor psychology. Instead, they build systems that function regardless of what's happening in the broader economy. Systems that work when everyone is confident and when everyone is panicking. Systems that don't need fear to function. And here's what's remarkable. Those systems actually produce better outcomes, not just in crisis, but all the time. Okay? Amish children grow up with skills, with purpose, the clear understanding of how the world works. They're not anxious about the future because they know they can handle it. They're not afraid of economic collapse because they've rebuilt lives that do undepend on the economy's stability. Okay? They're free in a way that most people, even wealthy people, are not. So why doesn't everyone do this? Okay? Why do we keep buying gold and stocks and cryptocurrencies and whatever else we're retold will keep us safe? Okay? Because we've been taught that security comes from accumulation. Okay? That the person with the most wins, that wealth is the goal, and everything else is just a means to that end. The Amish reject this entirely. They believe security comes from community, that the person who is most connected wins. That wealth is meaningless if it isolates you from the people and systems that actually sustain life. And this is where we have to confront something uncomfortable. What if they're right? What if everything you've been taught about money and security and retirement and investment is designed to keep you dependent on systems that don't actually serve your interests? What if the real path to security looks nothing like what you've been sold? You don't have to become Amish to learn from them. You don't have to give up electricity or modern medicine or the internet, but you do have to ask yourself some hard questions. What would actually keep you safe if the systems you depend on stopped working? What skills do you have that produce value rather than just capture it? What relationships have you built that aren't transactional? Okay? What can you contribute to your community that makes you indispensable rather than just wealthy? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. Living through a period of profound instability. Currencies are being debased. Governments are accumulating unpayable debts. Climate change is disrupting food systems. Supply chains are fragile. Political institutions are losing legitimacy. And in response, people are doing exactly what they always do. They're buying gold. They're buying Bitcoin. They're looking for the magic asset that will keep them safe. But safe from what? Exactly. The crisis is big enough to make gold valuable. It's probably big enough that gold won't actually help you. And if the crisis is small enough that gold helps, then you probably didn't need it in the first place. You're stuck in the middle, holding an asset that only has value in a very narrow range of outcomes. Outcomes where things are bad enough that currency fails, but not so bad that social order collapses. That's a very small window, and you're betting your security on it. The Amish made a different bet. They bet that true security comes from being useful, from having skills people need, from being embedded in networks of mutual support, from owning productive assets rather than speculative ones, from building resilience rather than accumulating wealth. And so far, across centuries and multiple economic crises, that bet has paid off. You're probably wondering what this means for you, what you're supposed to do with this information. And here's the truth. There's no simple answer. You can't just abandon the modern economy. You can't just buy a farm and learn to quilt. But you can start asking different questions. You can start thinking about security differently. You can start building skills and relationships and systems that do undepend entirely on the continued functioning of institutions you do uncontrol. You can learn to grow some of your own food, not because you're preparing for the apocalypse, but because it connects you to the fundamental processes that sustain life. You can learn to fix things instead of replacing them. You can invest in your neighbors instead of just your portfolio. You can build networks of mutual aid. You can choose resilience over returns. And you can stop buying gold, not because gold might not go up in price. It might, but because even if it does, it won't actually make you more secure. So just make you wealthier in a system that's becoming less stable. And wealth in an unstable system is not the same thing as security. The Amish understood this from the beginning. They looked at the same economic forces everyone else sees and came to a completely different conclusion. Not because they're backward or naive, but because they're asking different questions. They're not asking how to get rich. They're re-asking how to build a life that could be taken away by forces outside their control. And the answer to that question is never gold. If you want to truly understand how these systems work, how the stories we're told about wealth and security serve certain interests while leaving most people vulnerable, then you need to keep questioning, keep learning, keep building alternatives. The Amish won't give you all the answers. They'll give you a framework for asking better questions. And in a world this uncertain, better questions might be the most valuable thing you